Hi, this is Paul Kandola, and welcome to another episode of Positivity with Paul, where I find fellow actuaries, pun intended, for a conversational Q&A on their life. The focus is on their journey along the actuarial exam path and beyond, some of the challenges they faced, and how those challenges shaped them to become who they are today. To give some brief context on becoming an actuary, there's a number of actuarial exams that one has to go through. These exams are very rigorous and typically only the top 40% pass at each sitting. They cover complex mathematical topics like statistics and financial modeling, but also insurance, investments, regulatory, and accounting. Candidates can study up to 5 months per sitting, and they usually take 5 to 10 years on average to earn their fellowship degree. To that end, I launched a series of podcasts because I was curious about what drove my guests to surmount trials and tribulations to get to that end goal of becoming an actuary. My guest in this interview is Khurram Tehseen. Khurram is currently Vice President of Data Science at Preston Ventures in California. He's a fellow of both the Society of Actuaries, the Canadian Institute of Actuaries, and also a master's degree in management analytics from Queen's University. In this podcast, Khurram talks about how he started on his path to become a fellow actuary, his personal experience of going through the exam process while concurrently working, along with his progression throughout his career while discussing the changes and routines to adapt to life away from his family. We also discuss the interpretability of utilizing data models and running analytical methods in its current state, along with the current need for both analytical and communication skills when it comes to making business decisions. Hope you enjoy this extensive discussion. We have Khurram Tehseen here. Welcome, Khurram. Welcome, sir.
Hey, Paul, how's it going?
Good, good. So tell me how, let's bring it back to where it all started. How did you find out about actuarial science?
Yeah, for me, it was by coincidence. One of my close friends, who I'm still in touch with in high school, coincidentally kind of mentioned it that one of his cousins was actually an actuary. And when you're in grade 12, grade 11, you're starting to think about what you want to do with your career. Didn't really understand what my options were. So I was going down a track of kind of engineering based courses, right? Chemistry, physics, mathematics, those type of things were kind of my course load. And that's the direction that I actually ended up applying to a few university engineering programs. But at the last minute, I kind of stumbled upon this through a friend of mine who told me about his cousin, like I said, and looked into it. Didn't really understand it, but at the same time, didn't really understand engineering as well. It's something that you hear from your parents that, hey, just get into this, right? So looked into it, seemed interesting, seemed like a good mix of math, business, analytical skills, communication skills. So I decided to go for it. Probably didn't know enough until you get into the third year, second year courses to really understand what is it all about. But once you're in, right? You gotta kind of see it through. Um, and went into UFT like yourself. Started to take those courses and started to see what people were actually doing when you're going to networking events and starting to attend career fairs and talking to people. But the real started in high school by chance. Like a lot of things, you don't really know what you're getting into, but you end up making a career out of it.
Sure. Yeah, it's great that you had like other potential career options that you brought up, engineering and maybe something else in mathematics. What was your favorite course that you recall that like in high school and university? Was it actuarial or something else?
For me, I liked math. I could do math. I liked physics. I didn't really enjoy chemistry. Never really took biology. Never really took a business course, which I started taking business courses a little bit in university, and I actually enjoyed them more than the pure math courses. But I wouldn't say I knew what I didn't like more than what I liked, right? I knew I could do math and those analytical based courses, but wasn't really something that I thought I would kind of I'd be doing kind of full time all day every day, right?
Yeah, going through it in high school and university, you probably at that point are just looking at the career, like optimization problems and things like that with math, and working with that theoretically and trying to apply that as much as you can, right? So some way to use that in a career option. Um, and so I guess during university at U of T, you started doing the exams as well early on once you realized that probably after the second year. Uh, and
Yeah, the exams, as you know, are kind of structured in line with the courses, right? So I think it was the second year when students started to take the exam P and FM and things like that. So that was, I think, at the end of my second year, I sat for both of them at the same time, which I later realized was probably a mistake for me. I wasn't used to, what an actuarial exam was all about. But that was kind of a good thing that you were taking the courses and then you were writing the professional exam, so you didn't really have to put in a lot of additional effort, at least initially, because a lot of the stuff was repeat material or material aligned with the actual exam. So that's neat that the universities have structured it that way.
right. And what was your routine like? Obviously, you had to go through the whole course load of a U of T degree and the studying as well. How did you manage all that?
Yeah, the routine was basically study all day, study all night, right? um, I was actually commuting from about an hour away, right? Like a lot of students at University of Toronto. So that took up a lot of time, right? You would try to make sure that your courses are bunched up together, right? So like if you can have a 3-day course week, right? That was amazing because you got 4 days to really study on the stuff that got you a job, right? So anytime that you can squeeze in a couple hours in the library, right? You're trying to look for those opportunities. But the routine is basically attend those classes, study where you can, go home, study a little bit more. I wasn't really a morning person initially. I've become a morning person now, but trying to find ways where you can squeeze in an additional hour or two to get in more repetitions and things like that. That's kind of the name of the game.
So, did you actually go to those morning classes, or did you skip them?
Yeah, honestly, it's been so far back that it really kind of escapes me what the actual. I tried to avoid 9 a.m. classes from what I remember. Like I think I took a first year calculus class that was at 9 a.m. Kind of a newbie mistake, if you will. You have to go there and really understand, because there's kind of an initial university shock that hits you, right? There's a big difference between high school learning and university learning. But once you get over that, I think you're able to kind of adjust and really hone in on what works for you and what doesn't.
Yeah, all it takes is all you got, like they said, and you really worked on that really well to coordinate everything. Wanted to take you back now to now that we've gone and finished all the exams. Wanted to get your first experience. How did you better yourself the next time around to pass it after you failed that first actuarial exam? And yeah, tell us about how the structural change that you did.
Yeah, I think the first time that I kind of took those two exams together, right, P and FM, like I passed P, but I did not pass FM, which looking back, it was really like the material is not that difficult. But when you're in the thick of it, right, like I think what you have to realize is there's a reason why, you're really not getting the material. And so, depending on where you score, obviously, right, you're, as you know, right, they have the scale of 1 to 10, right? Like if you're close and borderline, right, then it's really just about certain concepts that you're probably not understanding. But if you're in the lower end, then you really got to understand, what did not work in your approach, right? Maybe it was, how you were structuring things in that particular sitting with all your other responsibilities that you have, or you just did not understand what the different exam structure would look like, right? When you switch from preliminary to FSA level exams, right? So, coming out of that experience, I think for me, that initial setback was more so, just understanding what it takes, right? And taking two exams at once, probably like 10 days apart or something like that, required an additional level of focus that I was not used to. And so even though you've taken those university courses that help you understand, you really gotta, it's almost like you're competing with other people in order for you to be in that top 30% to pass, right? So it's not like in university where, you just need to get above 50 and you're good, right? So it's a different mindset that you have to kind of approach the problem with, and that just requires a different level of focus.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of putting it. Just the whole structure of it. You obviously something needs to change and define that part of it that does. Like, have you ever had an exam where you thought you did well but you didn't, or vice versa? Like,
Yes.
I usually with the actuarial exams, I just knew that I passed it when I did, and I knew that I failed it when I did. It wasn't any like surprise, except maybe once I thought it was a 5, but it was a 6. That was about
Yeah,
it.
well, that's happened to me. So I think it was one of my FSA level exams, and this is kind of closing into the end, right? So you know how to study for these. You've kind of done all the preliminary. You've got your routine down, right? So you're kind of at the finish line, right? But I think from what I remember, it was one of um, the last exams, and um, I think it was um, starting to, like, I thought I really kind of put in my work, and I was confident that I would get a pass, but then I ended up with a 5. And so looking back, I think the reason for that was partially because, when you're studying for some of these exams, you just are not applying them while you're working, right? And so the track that I ended up taking was U.S. individual life insurance. And so, you even though you may be in a department or a part of the company that is U.S. specific life insurance, depending on the level that you're at, depending on what your projects are at that particular time, you're not necessarily applying all the different tax regulations and accounting rules on the specific project. So looking back, I think, when it really started to click in for me, it was well after I was taking these exams, right? And so as a result of that, you don't really get that, real understanding of what you're learning, right? You see those cases, you see those problem sets, you get familiar with kind of the details of how you're supposed to answer a question, but answering a question and applying that in real life just kind of adds another layer of understanding, which I don't think I grasped until later on in my career. And kind of
Oh,
the weird aspect of exams at those particular times was, if you didn't pass, you had to wait a year for you to take that particular sitting, because they used to do in May and in November, they used to alternate the FSA level exams.
right. Oh, yeah. For the FSA level exams, it was once a year. For some of the occasional, the US life ones, probably less
Right.
frequent, right? Yeah. So having more time or less frequency kind of made you have to force to zone in to that time period, because you knew that you don't have as many attempts
Yeah.
within the year, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what advice would you give to a smart driven student who's about to enter the actuarial field? Like, what advice should they take? What should they ignore? Um,
Yeah, I think the best advice that I can give is probably really understanding why you want to go into the profession. And why I say that is because it's a long journey, right? Anybody who's been through it, I've been through it, you've been through it. It really requires a lot of dedication and a lot of effort and kind of ignoring your friends and social circles and family at times, right? So having a really strong why to get you through those times where you have to make those tough decisions can really kind of keep you going. But also part of it is if when you start to question why you want to do something, is it because you really want to be in a particular industry? Is it because you like the salary prospects of a particular career, right? Like you need to have the right reason, because if you're going in for the wrong reasons, then there's going to be people who are doing it for the right reasons that are going to have the right motivation and are going to put in the effort, right? And so, there's a lot of careers out there that use similar skill sets, right? So if you're good with numbers, you're good with maybe investments. And there's an investment track, right? People go through and do 3 CFA level exams and get a uh, world-renowned designation, just like actuarial science, right? Data science has popped up in the last 5 or 6 years. That's a reputable profession as well, right? So you really need to understand, is this something that you're committed to, and if so, what is the level of attention that you're able to give to it?
For sure. Yeah. And we both took the masters in management analytics as well. And obviously look to leverage that going forward. At that time, predictive analytics was kind of in the pipelines, up and coming, and wanted to get ahead of the curve, assuming as well, right?
Yeah, so for me, I finished my designation, my actuarial designation, about 2012, I believe. And then I had about a couple of years where I just focused on work and other things and trying to catch up on life. Um, and then after that, you kind of still have that itch, right? You're like, okay, what else? What else is out there where I can really make an impact? Um, and I knew some of the techniques that we were using within actuarial science were a little bit outdated, if you will, or they weren't using the most sophisticated techniques. We were using obviously technology, but not the latest technology, right? And so there just seemed like there's more ways that I could apply myself. And I stumbled upon the data science and advanced analytics in general, and wanted to kind of learn from industries where it has been applied for a lot longer than banking or insurance and finance. And so that was kind of a primary motivation to enroll into that master's at Queen's. Um, and it really opens up your eyes, right? Now, I'm not sure what your experience is like, but for me, just learning from a group of people that you're surrounded with who come from all sorts of backgrounds, right, in terms of industries. Because actuarial science is very, individually driven, exam oriented, profession, right? Yes, there's a lot of learning you do on the job, but this was totally different, right? Like you're learning from a team-based atmosphere. People are coming from marketing backgrounds, from hospitality and tourism, right? And it's just totally different. That's, I think, what I was looking for.
Right. Yeah. I think one of the things that you hit it spot on. The two things that I found that was really interesting was that the team dynamic, for sure. That it was really like a siloed approach with the exam. You just focused on the problem, and everything else is just silent. And the other part was actually just trying to present really complex topics in an interesting, try simple way as well, so that people understand, how best to absorb all the numbers, all the different sort of analytic trends, for sure.
Yeah. So did you kind of feel that you had a little bit of advantage when you were going through that program, or was it?
In terms of the mathematics that was used, for sure, it was like a sort of a I wouldn't say like regurgitating, but like just learning it in a different way, like learning it more, not pencil and paper, but actually applying it through coding and whatnot, like the analytical tools that are used from that sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting sometimes, you think you know something, but until you kind of hear it from a different perspective. Like I remember one of the first few classes is the introduction to stats, right? At a master's level, I guess, but intro is still intro. And then on a day-to-day basis, you use some distributions, you use a little bit of stats, but you're not going into the actual theory of statistical inference. And so it was a good refresher, and kind of it's good that they kind of do it at the beginning, because that's kind of the core of what data science is built on.
In terms of current role at Preston Ventures, at a VP of data science, must have like applied the knowledge, but then that's just like the basics. I'm sure that there's more advanced things that kind of the neural networks and all that kind of get used, and random forest. I'm pretty sure random forest, like it's probably just models, right? That you're using is.
I mean, yeah, we're basically an asset management company, so our way that we kind of do various modeling techniques is really starting with this most simplest solution, right? So there's a lot of complicated modeling techniques out there, and they may work for the right data set, but I think one of the key focuses that we like to really make sure that we understand is, do we understand our data? And the best way that we can do that is starting with a simple model, right? And working our way up, right? Because there's a lot of kind of hidden secrets within each data set. And if you get bogged down in applying the latest and greatest, machine learning model that you saw in a paper, right, you kind of lose the focus of what is my data set look like, what's kind of the features that I need to engineer and things like that. So starting simple and then ratcheting up the complexity is kind of what we preach.
So when you say ratchet up, it's like different factors that sort of get added on, and then you check the statistics around that, like the AUC model, like that you kind of add on.
If you have a regression that can do the job, right, you don't necessarily need to fit a neural network, right? That type of simplicity in terms of a modeling perspective, because there's a lot of kind of learning that you have to make sure that everybody who's kind of signing off on the project has to do alongside with you, right? And so as a result of that, your kind of data scientists are learning the domain, your management may be learning the particular modeling techniques. There may be other external domain experts from a medical perspective that may give their opinion on certain things, right? So because there's a lot of cross-functional input from a lot of different people, breaking it down so that it's simple and easy for people to understand, it's kind of where we take the first shot. And once we have that understanding, then we can say, okay, going from step one to step two is a lot easier, because now you understand the basics.
Right. Yeah. You always want to start it off simple, because the low-hanging fruit's the easiest thing to communicate to folks, and then kind of build it up from there. How about when you have a model that has more than 3 dimensions? Say if it's 4, 5, 6 dimensions. How do you handle a situation like that to simplify it, or is it all done through analytical tools, or does it still require brain power?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole name of the game, is to kind of work with as many data points as possible, right? Both in terms of the number of instances that you're dealing with, and like you said, the number of features, right? So, we're always looking for new data sets that we can append on to our kind of core population. And as a result of that, we may have, thousands of variables, right? and to narrow that down, right, depending on the actual algorithm that you're using, obviously there's some feature selection techniques that you can use. But at the same time, some of it is just based off of common sense, right? Like at the end of the day, the thing that you have to realize is, a model for research purposes is good and you can have the best accuracy, but we're looking to put this thing into production, right? And in order to put it into production, you got to really understand what's driving the model, right? So you may have a feature that really gives you a lot of accuracy, and it may have been your top 50 in one of your top 50 features, right? But does it make intuitive sense, right? Do your domain experts agree? Does that make sense from a industry perspective, like where what we know about the data in terms of how the data was collected, or there's certain biases in there. So if you're able to kind of make all that in, then everybody kind of gives you that buy-in, and you're able to proceed forward.
Right. And it's interesting. So you're in assets now. Like traditionally, actuarial work is more the liability side, right, for long-term liabilities. So it was a total switch from previous work that was done. Like maybe you're doing like asset liability matching and things, but this is like pure assets now.
Yeah, it's actually pretty similar. It's not pure asset like in ALM, right? This is actually very much driven by life insurance. So we're an asset manager of life settlements, right? So in the U.S., there's a specific asset class called life settlements where you're able to basically sell your life insurance policy. And there's investors out there on the other side of that transaction who want to purchase that set of cash flows. And so they pay a price up front, and they're able to kind of buy that set of cash flows. And so as a result of that, that's still kind of very life insurance centric, right? So I'm able to use my core actuarial skill set, but at the same time, apply some of the new machine learning techniques to make that prediction.
Cool. That's amazing. In terms of like what your daily routine is like, how's that changed? Obviously, this is your first time living away from Toronto, like your first job away from Toronto. How's it been in terms of the change? How's your daily routine improved since moving? What have you learned?
Yeah, one of the things that as I was applying to internship positions, I remember in third year of university was wanting to go into the U.S., right? And had a couple of opportunities, but for one reason or another, didn't end up taking those. I think one was in Connecticut or another in New York, but I ended up staying local. So after about 9 or 10 years working in the industry, came about this specific opportunity here in Los Angeles, and it was really the right fit, right, in terms of what kind of I was looking for in terms of the company, the role. And so, being in a warmer climate obviously helped a lot coming from Toronto. And so moved here, was pretty fortunate to, be moving here with my wife. And so we were able to kind of both find jobs here and kind of focus on our careers. So, once I moved here, it was a little bit of a change because, you're used to commuting, right? Unless you're living downtown, right? A lot of people have that long commute. And so here, I wasn't driving into LA. Our offices are about an hour south of LA in Orange County.
Oh, okay.
The commute was, 15, 20-minute drive with very little traffic. So that was a welcome change, which allowed me to kind of use my mornings more effectively, right? And so, was not really one to spend a lot of time exercising and, focusing on my health because I was so into, getting my exams passed and getting my master's done and things like that. Now that I had all this additional time, that's kind of what I turned to is being able to focus on my health and get some additional workouts in the morning, and then being able to go in and spend it really motivates you and refreshes you once you're able to get the hardest part of your day done in the morning. And so, get a full work day in, come back, relax, spend some family time, and get ready for the next day.
Yeah, and the time zone difference must be a huge advantage too. 3 hours that you get tagged on now for the morning, so you probably feel like you have a longer day coming from the East Coast.
You get used to it, right? So, I mean, um, depending on kind of your day, right? Sometimes you have earlier start days because everybody else has already started their day, right? So if you have meetings from clients overseas, like in India, or you have people on the East Coast, right? By the time it's noon for them, right? It's only 9 o'clock, right? So you kind of have to start your day earlier as a result of that. So, which wasn't really an issue for me, but you know, you have to kind of watch your hours as a result of that to make sure that you're accommodating for other times. Definitely.
I'm sure you still have a lot of folks back in the Toronto area. Like, how do you? Obviously, I'm sure like you missed them and things like that. Is FaceTime good enough to combat that, or like do you ever feel like they fly down here or you fly down?
Yeah, so the first year was funny because when we first moved here, um, you know, we were hosting families, friends. Like I think in the first 6 months, we had like 8 different people come and visit us. So that was fun because it gave us a chance to, enjoy LA but not miss home. But one of the things that we tried to do is kind of visit frequently, right? Because this was a career move for both me and my wife, right? So at the same time, we didn't want to lose touch with both of our families and friends that we had in Toronto. So we still go back, when it's a major event in the family or it's a religious holiday or you have like a very extended break like in Thanksgiving. um, COVID obviously has been tough, right? I think it was about a year that we did not go back as a result of that. I'm sure like everybody else. um, so that was a little bit tough, but I think with stuff opening up now and people being able to travel hopefully soon without any restriction between the borders, right? That should
Yeah,
help make it a little bit easier.
fingers crossed. Yeah, hopefully it comes soon. But as long as we stay healthy, and I think that's the name of the game right now, right? When you think of the word successful, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think that the definition for me, right, is I really equate success with balance, right? Um, there's people out there that really dedicate everything that they have to a cause, right? And as a result, they're very successful in that field, right? And that's commendable, and it takes a lot to really zone into a particular thing. Um, but if you're able to really juggle all the different balls in the air at the same time, right? And do them at a level that is, making sure that they're getting the attention that they need. And I think that's something that's, in my opinion, a lot tougher to do, right? So,
Like a mom. Yeah, that works. And
it's just the different aspects of your life, right? So, mentally, I break it down into, you have your family, obviously, you have your health, you have your work, you have your religion, and I'm sure other areas for other people. And it's very easy to just focus on one and kind of ignore everything else, right? And there's periods of time in your life that you do have to focus on one and sacrifice others. Um, but as overall, right, after you've passed those prime years, how well can you balance everything? I think to me that's somebody that's successful. I don't have an exact name for you, but you know anybody who's able to do that gets a lot of respect from me.
yeah, for sure. That balance is key, and sometimes it's hard to find that balance too, right? Sometimes it's overload, overheating, overcooling, and just sort of like how recessions and expansions happen, right? And the economy just overheat and cooling. So in terms of just for clarity, is it the models that need optimization, or is it just the, more data that needs to be collected, or more granular data to utilize these new models, like be a better data scientist in your eyes?
Yeah, I think the data is definitely number one, right? Like you can have the best data set with a simple model, and I think it would still get you results. And the converse of that is you can have the most complicated model, but if your data is not there, then it's going to be really hard for you to get the prediction. So um, I think first and foremost, you have to make sure that you have as much data as possible, right? And you have the right data for the problem that you have. And so secondarily comes the modeling and the algorithm that you want to choose.
Yeah, sort of like that. What's it called? The garbage in, garbage out approach. If your data is not right, then how's it going to
Yeah,
come out output right?
yeah, exactly.
Do you want to discuss like your personal, like your marketing brand? I know we didn't discuss about this before, but yeah, any like your platform or brand that you wanted to share?
Um, Not particularly. I don't kind of see myself as one that's branded himself in a particular way. I think the only kind of platform that I use is LinkedIn from time to time to kind of share some thoughts and um, things that I think are missing from the industry. I think what I really seem to focus on is kind of the blend of both um, you know analytical skills combined with communication skills, right? I think there's people that can do one or the other, right? But there's a real need for people who can do both. And there's learning happens when you're able to kind of bridge gaps between two different types of domains, right? So oftentimes, you have machine learning and AI being applied in medicine. You have it being applied in insurance. You have it, it's in almost every single industry. And so you can't just be, a one-trick pony, right? You got to be able to understand all the different aspects of why this particular domain can benefit from a new approach and thinking. And so the people who are able to really be that bridge, right? Because you may have some stakeholders or an audience that's kind of still used to thinking about it in a particular way. How are you able to, communicate the new approach, the new way of thinking to them in a way that they are able to kind of understand, appreciate, and are willing to adopt, right? So a lot of that communication and stakeholder management, that ability to motivate your team to give you the results and present the results in a way that is going to be useful for the team and the company. I think that's something that I usually like to give my opinion and write a couple of pieces on here and there.
Is it miniature presentations that happen to summarize the data to show like what works and what doesn't, in a data visualization platform sort of thing is the name of the game?
Yeah, it really depends. Like it depends on what is the objective that you're trying to achieve with your particular presentation, right? So I wrote a piece on that recently. If your audience is really at the same level and you're able to kind of explain to them clearly, then you can be as complicated as you need to be, right? If they're at a slightly lower level because they just don't have the background, they're very logical, they understand what you're trying to do, but are just not familiar with terminology, right? Then maybe you take a step back and kind of help define some of those things for them, and you're able to kind of take them through step by step and say, okay, this is what this metric means, this is what this algorithm's doing. And depending on what you're trying to achieve, right? If you're trying to put in a model that's going to have a really big dollar impact, right, then you're going to have a lot of eyes that are focusing on what you're building, right? And that's the way it should be, right? You should be expecting people to ask you questions and make sure that you're doing the right thing. If it's something really small and does not have a big impact to the company or to your overall mission, then you can probably get away with not explaining a lot of things as long as you're getting the right answer at the end of the day.
Well, one of the things as well, especially with banking and insurance, that the reason why it's slow to adopt with technology is just the regulatory, obviously, and the acts that are implemented. There is disruption, but you sort of bottled in a way. Is that fair to say? With a lot of models that are run, like it has to be within a certain framework involved.
Yeah, I think it really depends on your industry, right? So, let's say you're working in machine learning for medicine, right? And in the medicine world, right, your chances of, or your, if you make a wrong prediction, right, depending on what you're working on, right, it can have a really huge impact, right? So I think in those industries where it's life or death, or where you're kind of affecting the outcome really severely, there does need to be a lot of regulation, right? In other areas where you're working on marketing use cases, and the kind of downside of it is somebody does not pick up an offer that you give them, right? Probably not so much. I think insurance is interesting in a way that especially in property and casualty or specific life insurance use cases, right? There's a lot of regulation from a kind of ethics perspective, right? Make sure you're pricing in a way that is not unfairly biasing people out of the market, but also from a kind of regulation perspective, from a what's accepted, from an accounting and reserving perspective, right? So models need to be built a certain way to make sure your liabilities are supported for a particular amount of time, and certain models are accepted, and part of that will change over time, right, as people's perception and knowledge kind of increases. But yeah, those are challenges that you have to deal with in almost every company.
Yeah, for sure. Ethics is a huge, that could be like a whole other podcast, how these models can be vetted or audited, like from a third person standpoint, being like, this is how it works. Obviously everything that has that gets filed has some sort of third party audit, given like the complexity of this, how that shifts, right? If there is some sort of regulatory requirement that follows this, or what that body would be.
Yeah, that's kind of the dilemma these days, is how much interpretability do you actually need, right? People make the argument that, we don't know how cell phones work, or we don't know how airplanes work, but we're still flying in them, we're still using them on a day-to-day basis. But I think that's a kind of naive argument, right? Like a lot of times you kind of hear that from people who are building the models and don't necessarily want to do the work to explain what they're doing, and they just want to see the end result and justify it in a way that proves the point that they're trying to make. I think it needs to be a balance, right? Like there's always going to be a need for you to explain what you've built, right? In a normal corporate world, right, people aren't going to all of a sudden hand you the keys and say, go ahead, let's change our ways all of a sudden, from process A to process B, just because, 2 or 3 metrics kind of align and speak the same way. So you'll always have to kind of explain what you're doing, why you're doing certain things, how you came to those conclusions, if your data set biased in any way. And that's part of kind of getting the right business decision, right? You always want to make sure that your checks and balances are in place, so at the end of the day, it doesn't come back to bite you.
For sure. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it as well. What's your favorite book that you would like to recommend to the audience?
Not really good with favorites. So I think one that I do like is Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss. Right? I don't know if you've read it or not, but and it looks very intimidating because it's like this of a book. It's actually
Yeah.
opposite, because it has very short stories, and it's I think structured into three separate parts, where one part is just on health, one part is just on you know
Fitness.
yeah. So and within them you just have examples, right? So people who have kind of done well in that particular aspect of their life, um, them just sharing what they've learned over the years, right? So I think it's a very kind of informative read. I'm not really into fiction, right? I want to read something and I want to be able to apply it directly into my life.
Yeah.
So I think that's a quick one that you don't necessarily need a lot of time, not a lot of like committed consecutive time for you to kind of go through if you're just looking for an additional piece of motivation or additional kind of inspiration from somebody who is well accomplished in whatever area, right? It's kind of speaking back to that point about balance, right? Then just reading a page or two kind of gets you going.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of like an optimized biography of different things like meditation and fitness. And yeah, I totally agree. It's definitely up there, one of the top books for sure. It's the ebook though, so I don't have that big fat stack like you do. But yeah, thanks for coming on, Khurram. Really appreciate your time, and yeah, hope you're invited anytime back on the channel. Have more knowledge that you want to share with the audience.
Yeah, for having me. It was fun.
Awesome. All right. Take care.